Hey, how y'all doing, man? This is the third show,
Yeah,
third show of the Rapper podcast show. I got it right this time.
yeah.
Did I get it right this
You
time?
forgot me though. You said just the
Is this hold
rapper
on, Rapper
podcast. Show.
podcast show?
It's the
The
rapper.
Rapper and the Pastor show. The Rapper and the Pastor show. All right, one day we gonna get this right, and it's gonna make sense
Someday.
someday. Okay, the Rapper and the Pastor show. Today, I guess we're going to talk about sports.
Has your interest in sports changed at all since you became an adult? Since you became a Christian? Either of those
Yeah,
factors?
yeah, I can say I used to be one of those guys who really loved like basketball. So I would know the high school the players went to. I would know their high school stats. I would know their jersey numbers. I would know how many points they scored the night before, whether or not they scored better when they were sick or, or worse. Like it's like, so basketball was my passion. But when I became saved, gradually over the years, my love for sports kind of dissipated. Even with football, I used to love football. I used to be a really big Detroit Lions fan. But as the years went on after me becoming saved, my love for football kind of dwindled a little bit. I watch it during the playoffs, but I don't have a love for it like I used to. Partly it's because Sundays start to become so, so busy regarding church and things like that. So, and then some of it is because of just conviction, not wanting to be put something before anything before my love of Christ, which I did do early on with basketball. I got a funny story about that. I remember, I remember one day I was reading the Bible and had the basketball game on at the same time. So I'm reading the Bible, and I don't know if this is like I don't know, I don't know if God did it or if it just was happenstance. But I'm reading the Bible, but my attention is kind of drawn away by the game. This is when the Pistons were good. This was like '05, the summer of '05. Mm-hmm. And no, it wasn't summer yet. It wasn't summer yet. It was fall it was winter of '05. And I was reading the Bible because I got saved in March of '05. So it was like right after then. So I'm reading the Bible. It's kind of taking attention away from the game. Is kind of taking attention away from what I'm reading. And I never had problems with this TV before, like never. And the TV just went black, like just went out. Uh-huh. And to me, that was a sign. Like, so it might have been superstitious, but I didn't watch basketball until the following year. Like, I just didn't watch. And then I kind of, like after that, my love for basketball kind of dwindled. And, I still watch it now. Like last night, I caught some of the playoff games in the bubble, which is an interesting thing to me. I guess we'll talk about that a little later if you think anything about the bubble. But my love for basketball really hasn't been what it used to be. Like I still got friends and we still argue over it about who the greatest is. But just like my overall passion for it, like I had when I was younger, it's not what it used to be. What about you? How is your relationship with sports kind of evolved over the years?
So I used to follow. I've been a huge Lions fan since I was a little kid, and that's like going back to my upbringing. The neighborhood that I lived in Rochester Hills was a pretty big neighborhood, but there were hardly any kids in it. There was only one kid my age in the whole neighborhood, and he was into sports. And so because he was into sports, like my dad doesn't watch sports. He watched auto racing and tennis, and that was it. And so my dad never watched sports. He didn't care about them. My mother, of course, didn't. And so I got interested in sports because the only kid that was my age, he actually was a year younger than me, but close enough. He was interested in sports. So I started playing sports with him to have something to do, and he started talking to me about sports. And so I started watching. For some reason, I started watching the Lions, and I've been a lifelong Lions fan. But added to that, like I started watching NFL football, the Detroit Lions. I started watching baseball. He was a huge baseball fan, and so we played baseball all summer. And I started following the Tigers right before 1984 when they won the World Series. They started 35-5 and won the World Series when you were all of 2 years old.
Just a young vibrant too.
See, and I was 12, so I was at a really good age to be able to
to understand it,
follow the games. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was a paper boy too, so I could look at the papers as I was delivering them. As the Tigers became bigger and bigger news, they were more on the front page. So I followed baseball, I followed football, I followed basketball a little bit, the Pistons. And then a few years later in 88, 89, 88, they almost beat the Lakers for their first. So if they would have won that, they would have actually been the first team to three-peat, right? But they
they lost that championship on a phantom call,
right?
That Bill Laimbeer didn't really foul him, so
That's
it's
right.
they would have been three-peat. They would have been the first three-peat.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the Wolverines won. The basketball team, they won.
Yeah.
The NCAA championship too there in the late 80s. And so, I used to follow them. Of course, when you're a kid, you have a lot more free time. And so I followed all of those sports. In high school, I played baseball every year. I played that from 7th grade all the way through I graduated. And since I was at a small Christian school, we didn't have football, sadly. Play that. But I played soccer, and I played basketball as a 9th and 10th grader, but I wasn't, as you know, I wasn't good enough, so I did not make the team. Even at my small Christian school, I didn't make the varsity team.
I guess I should have said something about that. I did play high school basketball too.
Yeah, if you play,
the year I went to Western International. The year before I was going to varsity, I wasn't good enough to make varsity in my 9th and 10th grade year. But I was very good on junior varsity. But I think some of it was politics and some of it was maybe my lack of focus. I really wasn't focused on basketball all the time. But I was very good my 10th grade year. So the year of my 11th grade, I actually turned my ankle late in the summer, and that kind of derailed me. I actually fractured it. So it derailed my basketball summer. So I remember I was planning on having a big summer league that year, twisted my ankle in a tournament at the Boys and Girls Club, fractured it. And then I had to sit out for the early part of the season, and I never got back into basketball. It was some personal decisions, but I just never got back into it. But I kind of regret it, not really pursuing it like I should have, but in high school I actually played basketball.
Okay.
I played football too, high school football.
What position in football?
I played free safety and wide receiver.
Nice.
So but I got hurt one game, actually a concussion, and my mother wouldn't let me play anymore. So she was terrified when she seen they knocked me out in the stands. So she wouldn't let me play football no more. But I almost picked up baseball, but I ended up tearing my groin playing basketball right before the baseball season, and then I didn't ever play baseball. But the baseball coach wanted me to play baseball because he seen me. I ran cross country. He seen me running in a park in a park. We used to have Clock Park. We used to run a mile around it, and I was pretty good at distance running. Mm-hmm. So he seen me running one day, and he was like, "You will be a good outfielder." So I was going to play baseball, but I pulled my groin that year, so I never got into baseball. So that was my sports career, my brief sports career.
Okay.
And I played a little basketball in college, but I never really pursued it like I was supposed to. But, yeah.
So it sounds like your interest in sports as a fan, it faded mostly due to your faith in Christ or growth as a Christian.
Yeah, I would say so. What did yours fade over the years because of your growth in as a Christian?
It definitely faded over the years, but it was really more about as my life got busier, I had to. Yeah. It got harder to follow the games.
Yeah.
When one of my kids, and I forget which one of my, well, I couldn't be my oldest one because he was born in the fall, but my two younger ones were born in May, and they both, one of them had, two of my kids had like sleeping problems when they were infants, and so I ended up rocking them a lot, and I was watching the Tigers with the muted while I was rocking that kid. I can't remember if it was my son or daughter.
Right.
And so I started watching baseball a little bit then, but then whichever one it was, the flashing, the different brightness on the screen, like got the attention of the child, and I couldn't do that anymore. So,
yeah.
But for the most part, so basically over time, I started following it less and less and less to now where the only sport I follow is pro football.
Okay. I think baseball is interesting because I never really was interested in it younger, but my oldest son, he started playing baseball, and I said, well, I have to learn some of what this game is about. So as I learned the game and started following baseball, I started to notice how intriguing it was, like the matchups and the strategies, and so I began to appreciate baseball a lot more as I got older and my son was involved in it than I did when I was younger. And baseball is a very fascinating sport once you understand the matchups and, pitching and the mechanics and even the way people, certain batters. And so it's a very interesting sport once you understand the technicalities of it. Yep. But I remember just thinking it was boring, but then once I learned about it and understood how it was, it's a dope sport to watch. It is.
As long as you have time on your hand, because there's so many games.
Yes,
so long.
Yeah.
That's the part.
And they're very long. And I remember I took my family to a game. We had seats like 2 rows away from the field. Oh, and I remember thinking like, wow, this is crazy. Like, but it was more exciting in person than it is watching it.
Yes.
It's the same way for hockey too. Like hockey just looks boring, but then when you watching them in person, seeing how fast they're actually going, it's unbelievable what they can do on those skates on that ice. I don't see how they can do it. How they do it. Yeah, but sports is dope to me.
Yeah. So you touched on hockey, and we were both young people and young adults because the Red Wings were so good for so long, right?
Yeah.
We were a hockey town. I have no interest in that sport
at all.
whatsoever.
Me either.
Never had.
Yeah, me either.
So
yeah, I do. I'm sorry, Detroit. I can't. I can't speak to it one way or the other. I just know that we in Detroit, we just kind of took it for granted. We were the Red Wings. We were good. So it's interesting now for them not to be that good. You know what I mean? So, but I hear they're turning the corner too, though, next year. So we'll see.
Yeah. So, So my interest in sports was really more about getting busier, or my lack of interest, my loss of interest is really more about getting busier and getting older and having a family and just my life becoming more complicated to where it kind of returned to where it was. Like originally I was only interested in the Lions, and now the only sport I follow is the Lions. If the Wolverines ever get good again in football, I'm sure I will watch them more. And living here in the Ann Arbor area, like people ask me that all the time, like about, did I see the game? And I actually have gone to a few games, due to the courtesy of friends more than anything. But so I could easily get into college football if the Wolverines ever get good again.
Yeah.
And I think if the Pistons get good again, I'll start watching them in the playoffs. And if the Tigers do, I might watch them in the playoffs too. But for the most part, I don't really follow anything other than the Lions. And actually, because Tom Brady I was interested in football, in college football, when I was younger and didn't have any children. And Tom Tom Brady was a Michigan player. He was a starter, but they like platooned him with this other guy, Henson, and so it's like I always felt like it was unfair because I thought Brady was much better. It seemed obvious to me that Brady was the better player, and so the fact they would take him out of the game and play Henson was really strange to me. And so when he got drafted by the Patriots, I kind of was interested in watching his career there. And so since the Lions are epically bad always, and they're in the NFC, the Patriots became my AFC team, and I followed them as well. It'll be interesting this year with Brady being in Tampa Bay. I'm really excited to watch that and see what they're like. But
that's going to be very interesting. Yeah, but this part of I think some of the reason why he went so low was because of how they were doing it with Drew Henson. And so it was. So when he started playing it, it surprised a lot of people around the NFL, but it didn't really surprise Michigan fans.
Yeah.
So I think that was crazy.
Yeah.
But I never really been big into college football. I was big into college basketball. I'm a State fan. I'm a Michigan fan too. But they're typically the last few years they've been good at the same time, very good at the same time. But I just like the way Coach Izzo is. You know what I mean? Just the way he coaches, and you could tell he's a player's coach, and the guys love him. And then he knows how to inspire them whenever the dance comes around. So it's interesting to see how they'll be just flying. They'll be good, but nobody really won't. Nobody will be really talking about them. Then all of a sudden they'll win their last 7-8 games, and then they do very well in the dance. So it's but just my like the attentiveness I used to have for sports kind of dwindled away. And don't get me wrong, I still watch a Pistons game. I still watch it. I'm just not enthralled with it like I used to be. Like everything. I was a diehard Pistons fan, and everything was Pistons. Like I was just a diehard fan.
So was I during the Bad Boys era.
Yeah.
And when that fell apart, then Dumars became the general manager, and I wanted him to do well, and he did do well, right? He went the team that he put together that won the championship, with Rip and Chauncey and all those guys, Rashid. Like, that was amazing how he put that team together. Yeah. And I did watch those teams in the playoffs.
Yeah. See, that's one at that time, Grant Hill, I'm 11, 12. I'm starting to find out that I love basketball. So the Grant Hill era, and then shortly after that with the trade for Big Ben to Orlando, that's when that era started. And then that's when I was really into basketball. Like, everything was the Pistons. Like, you couldn't get me away from the TV at that time. If I'm in just everything, just like from ESPN to Fox Sports, everything Pistons, I was just into it. So, yeah. And that lasted they were good for about 5 or 6 years. Yeah. Very good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rick Carlisle came in and they did well. And then I was mad when they kicked him to the curb, for I think because and I remember that time, Rick Carlisle was more hard-nosed than he is now, because he was younger. He's better in Dallas, but there he was more, and the players didn't like him. Right.
And so they got rid of him, you know what I mean?
But I don't think they liked Larry Brown either. Everything I read about him was he was difficult for everybody. The owner didn't like him. Dumars didn't not like him. And the players didn't really like him either. And
I think some of it was he was such of a old school. He had an old school mentality.
Yeah.
But that was a winning mentality, and Rick Carlisle shaped them, and I think Larry Brown got Chauncey to where Chauncey needed to be. Mm-hmm. So that was the key to that team. And once he got Chauncey to where Chauncey needed to be, because Chauncey actually liked him, but it was other players that didn't like him. So once Chauncey got him to where he needed to be, then he was all right. But Larry Brown, you couldn't change his mind. And then he had, even when he was here, I remember when they played the Spurs, when they lost the Spurs in 7 games in the finals in '05.
Yeah.
He, he was already on his way out, and that hurt a lot of the players too. So,
and then they brought in Flip, and everybody thought,
and they love Flip. Yeah, they love Flip.
The key, and this guy's going to win, and he just never. I felt like they underperformed under Flip.
Yeah, because the emphasis. Flip came in and said this team can score, which they could.
Yes,
but it took the edge away from who they were, which was a defensive, hard-nosed team. And Flip, Big Ben didn't like the way Flip coached, and that's why he left. So yeah, that was during that time I was all in at that time. But then I'm slowly coming out of it. 05, 06, 07. I know what's going on, but I'm just, slowly but surely fading away from it. And then their demise, how they got worse and worse, just was sealing the deal for me.
Yeah.
I mean, and I never really got back into it. I guess if the Pistons were to get good, I would start watching them regularly, but I don't know if I would still love it like I did. I probably just would be watching them.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't, and I think I'd be the same way. You wouldn't be, reading every story in the news. Find out everything, right? Which I still. Well, this year I haven't. This season's so strange, but that's how I followed the Lions, and in particular, and the NFL in general. Is like I used to read all the, everything that. About the Lions and about the NFL every day, and I haven't hardly read much at all this season yet. Yeah. So did you ever encounter anyone who discouraged you from following sports or challenged your values because you were a sports fan, maybe not to spend so much time and energy on it?
No. Yeah, it was a little bit of my own walk. Cause you got to understand, like the church I got saved in, there wasn't a high emphasis on discipleship. Mm-hmm. Like you just came to church every Sunday. So the conviction for me and whether or not I was putting sports above God was just reading the scriptures. Mm. And then my love for Christ was growing. And I noticed that I would sometimes push him to the side. So it was never a situation where somebody was challenging me to do it, because I just didn't have that I didn't have those kind of relationships in my life. Now, don't get me wrong. I had Christian friends, and we challenged each other. We talked about the scriptures, but I never had anybody say, "Hey, you might love sports too much," or I just never had that. Mm-hmm. No, not in my life. Have you ever experienced that?
Not really. I remember when I was a kid, in high school, I believe. We had like kind of a series of special meetings at our church that started on Sunday morning, and then we always had a Sunday night service at that church too. And then I think it went Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night as well. And one of the speakers on Sunday morning like really hammered us on make Sunday the Sabbath, which was not, my church was not Sabbatarian growing up.
Yeah.
And he really pushed this though. Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, and you shouldn't be watching the NFL. Now he was a college football fan, so that made it easier for him, right?
Yeah.
Because his team's playing on Saturday.
On Saturday.
But I remember, and this was a guy I really respect and still do respect. I remember him hammering that, and like I went home and watched the Lions and maybe felt a little guilty about it. And then I remember this distinctly, like a man in the church who he was on the staff actually in the church. He and I were talking before the Sunday night service, and he asked me, like, did you see the Lions game today? And just as he said that, we were standing right outside the men's room. The door opened, and this pastor came out, and I was like, yeah, that was an awesome game, So he had just preached that morning about how we shouldn't be watching NFL football, and basically, I could tell by the look on his face, he was pretty dismayed that we hadn't applied his message. So, but really, that's the only time I recall anybody at all preaching anything that was anti or negative, even in the slightest, about sports. For the most part, I think most pastors are sports fans to some or other.
Yeah, I haven't really been. I have never heard a sermon like that where it challenges your, for whether or not you should be watching on a Sunday at all. I just think, just for me, it was just, you love this too much. You know what I mean? Because, I would get into heated debates about this stuff. So that's when it became, to me, okay, you're arguing over things that don't even really matter. Like, it's just sports. So that's what, to me, the conviction came where, you just, I don't want to say it's foolishness, but it's definitely not something that's worth arguing over. You know what I mean? So that's when it started to challenge, like, what are you doing? You out here arguing over a basketball game. These people don't know you. And you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's what it came down to me as I began to grow in Christ. And I noticed that my love for it was altering my character.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's what it was for me.
So, one thing about sports that's, I think, to the good is that you can start a conversation with most other men about sports. Mm-hmm. It's like something you can connect on superficially, at least, at the very beginning. And then whether they're Christians or non-Christians, you have something to talk about in terms of small talk. So I think that's actually to the good. Because in other areas of popular culture, that's not necessarily the case. Yeah,
a lot of things are very, very divisive.
Right.
So there's things that you can't talk about. But sports is one of those things in the culture that tends to unify us, no matter what kind of background we have.
Yeah.
So that is a good thing about it.
And even if like I was talking to a guy the other day who is a Packers fan, so there's that rivalry. We're all in the NFC North together. Yeah. But we could talk about football, me as a Lions fan, him as a Packers fan, even though we weren't on the same page rooting for the same team. We could still have a civil conversation about it. Whereas in politics, you can't do that. And, almost anything else about our culture is like you said, divisive, right? Yeah. So I think that's to the good, but
there's no way you could be a Democratic and a Republican right now and just talk about politics.
Right.
There's no way you could do that right now.
But I do think that it can become an idol in people's lives,
Yeah.
And so even back in the day, Charles Spurgeon, kind of the famous Baptist pastor in London, I believe that it's been a long time since I read Spurgeon at all, but I do believe that he was very anti-sports, very negative about sports, and really felt that it was antithetical to following Christ to be a sports fan, I think, at all.
Yeah. But some early church fathers did too. You know what I mean? But it was different back then because the Colosseum was just, this is where a lot of evil stuff happened. So I understand their, negation towards it. But Spurgeon, I haven't read a lot of Spurgeon lately either. I used to read a lot of Spurgeon, but I do remember him having an aversion to sports. Yeah.
So, I guess neither one of us has encountered that too much in our current, evangelical kind of environment. Yeah. But it is apparently something that has in the past been an issue of contention for Christians. Yeah. And as you mentioned in your own walk with God, it can become an idol, but anything can become an idol. I know another guy, another Christian man who he's a young Christian, but I think Bitcoin to him and all that whole scene is something that he follows as closely as you and I followed sports back in the day when we were young, and so there are, and politics to speak of it.
Politics.
That's become an idol for a lot of Christians too.
Really, you got to be careful what political party, whatever it is. Your political position can definitely become an idol.
Yep.
When you care, especially when you allow it to, and this is where I think my problem was with sports, when you allow it to change a character where you're arguing with other Christians.
Yeah.
To where there's legit animosity over something, like, yeah, it's pretty much an idol to you. If you can just forget that you're talking to another Christian, like, that's crazy.
So you touched on the fact that in the early church it was controversial, and really, if I understand right, for Jewish people, since Christianity emerged out of the Jewish faith and out of Jewish culture, it was definitely considered completely taboo for Jewish people to follow the games, but then Paul comes along in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 24 through 27, and compares his discipleship to competing in the games. First Corinthians 9:24. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Then verse 25. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. And I haven't preached through 1 Corinthians yet, but I had some coursework on it in seminary. And if my recollection is correct, the commentators think they think that most Christians would have been, and probably all Jewish Christians would have been, surprised that Paul seemed to know the games and follow them to some degree and use them as an illustration uncritically without criticizing them. Yeah. So that kind of suggests, I think, that this is more of a Christian liberty issue than Christians in the early church perhaps felt, in their expectations.
Yeah, see, that's an interesting point, because Paul is using it to illustrate the certain level of focus that we should have as believers. And athletes, I give this example all the time when I'm talking to Christians and trying to teach them on how to remain consistent and grow in the faith, right? Yeah. So I use this example. Rip Hamilton, right?
Yes. Sir.
He said once in an interview that he shot 1,000 jumpers a day.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So every day he's shooting 1,000 jumpers. And I can really imagine those first 100 jumpers were tough. Then 200 was even tougher. Then 300 was even tougher. But as he's shooting all these jumpers a day, two things are happening. One, he's becoming more comfortable and he's developing his mechanics to where it's automatic.
Yep.
He's got the same motion, same flick of the wrist, the same position of his elbow to his face. Every time he's perfecting his technique, right?
Yep.
The other thing that happens is when he gets into the actual games and when things get hard, because he's put so much practice in, those situations are less strenuous for him.
Right.
So I always correlate that to, as Christians, we have to be so focused and we have to practice every day, and we have to believe that this is who we are. We are actual Christians. These are the things we have to practice each and every day, no matter how hard it gets. And as we do that, when we find ourselves in tough situations or situations that we have to exhibit our faith, those things become more easy. So I kind of liken that to what Paul is saying. Paul is giving an example of how something in the world can be used strategically to teach a Christian truth. You know what I'm saying? A Christian principle. And that way it can be applicable to the Christian's life, because the Christian has some sort of familiarity with the particular situation that the Christian teacher is bringing up. So I think there is Christian liberty there, but Paul is using it to teach a specific Christian truth. Right. And I think that's the thing that we have to take away from that.
Yeah, and as you suggested, sports does provide us sort of a template for what discipleship should be about. You know, the daily rigor of reading the scriptures when you don't feel like it, and having a consistent prayer life when you don't feel like it. Yep. And, you know, I mean, Paul does say that to Timothy too, you know, that he uses the gym as a metaphor too. You know, he says, exercise yourself unto godliness, you know, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness.
Yeah.
So, so I do think that's one of the things I was going to ask you is like, what do you think sports has contributed to your life, either playing or watching sports, in addition to, you know, what you said a moment ago about how it provides kind of a template?
Yeah, that the one thing about, I mean, sports specifically in my life is that it developed in me was, especially when I play organized sports, is like the willingness to be taught or be coached. You know what I mean? So it teaches you a bit of humility and humbleness because you don't know everything that's going on. Now, that doesn't mean that at that time I agree with everything the coach was saying. That don't mean me and the coach didn't bump heads sometimes.
Right.
But what it does mean is that it was setting my mindset up to be able to realize that you have to be coached. And so my sports background did help to contribute to the fact that I had to understand that God was like, Jesus was my coach. The Holy Spirit is my coach. He's the one that understands the play, so to speak. And he's telling me what I should do for, you know, me being a teammate with my Christian brothers and sisters, you know, and all of us have a specific role. All of us have, we're not, you know, I'm not a finger and she's not an eye, or, you know, we all have, and just like on the basketball court, you might have the scorer or the distributor or the rebounder or the shot blocker. We all have our different roles and different gifts, but they all come together for the good of the team. So it's like, those examples is what I learned from sports, it made it easier for me to kind of think through those things as I was reading them in scripture. So it kind of laid a little bit of that foundation. And that's why I say, like, when we talk about God's providence and just everything he's doing in your life to help shape you, even when, you know, I wasn't a believer, there were still things that was going on in my life that God was using to help me to become a better Christian when I became one.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful thing you just said, because like when I was growing up in, you know, like middle school, well, junior high, high school, I felt like, and as you know from my testimony, like last time, I was already seriously, a serious Christian and pursuing the ministry. And so in my little Christian school, you know, every gym teacher and the athletic director, the coaches, which were often the same person, they would say sports are great for you because they develop discipline. And I felt like they oversold the value of it, because I saw like some of my friends, you know, that I did consider to be friends who were better athletes than me. I would see them being very disciplined about taking shots every night, you know, not as many as Rip Hamilton did, but making sure jump shots every night, but not necessarily reading the Bible every day, you know, like I didn't see the translation in terms of discipline that they suggested. But what you said about coaching, I think is true. Like, I have a quote, it's back there, but my favorite musician, Wynton Marsalis, who's a trumpet player and a jazz arranger.
It's phenomenal, man. Yeah.
He has a quote that I actually saw on a Starbucks cup that said, "The humble improve." And that's exactly right. If you think you know it all and you can't take coaching and you can't take rebuke even, you're never going to get better. And eventually you're going to, you know, the game will pass you by. The team will pass you by. You'll end up being on the bench when you maybe once were a starter. And so it is too in the Christian life. If you don't take the rebuke of God's Holy Spirit from the Word, even from, you know, a godly Christian or a pastor or whatever, then, you know, you can get to a point where you're stagnating in your Christian life, and stagnation never lasts long. And usually we drift toward regress, right? So I think that's a really good point, Doug, that learning to take coaching and to humble yourself to change is that is one of the values maybe that sports teaches us.
It's not all bad, man. It's not all bad. No. It's not all bad. But you got to have balance. It's kind of like when Paul says, when I was a boy, I did childish things, but when I became a man, I put away the childish things. It's like, it's kind of what it is. You're growing into manhood. And I want to be careful when I say that, because there's a lot of people that's in the sports, and I don't want to offend nobody, but hey, it is what it is. If you just put in something, and it could be anything, if you put in anything before, as a Christian man with a family, if you put anything before your family and your love for Christ, then, you kind of being childish. You kind of being childish. Yeah.
So tell me about, I haven't watched any games, but tell me about what the NBA games in the bubble are like.
I watched it last night, right? And it's interesting, because what you have going on down there is you don't have a home court advantage. You don't have a crowd at all. There's no crowd there. The only crowd there is your teammates and a few reporters. And so you don't have a crowd, but you have like virtual. You have like a virtual crowd where people are tuning in from home, and they have like TV screens all around the arena, where it's people, sitting down at their house and they watching the game on a computer. So that's interesting. But you have fake crowd noise. you have the fake like sounds because there's no arena. Yeah. So you have, everything is generated. It's nothing real about it. But what I've learned though, because they're actually playing rec basketball, there's no crowd there. Right. And so it's going to be interesting to see like the normal factors that make the games tougher or easier for either team are gone. Yeah. So it's just all the same. They're all on the same playing field. Right. So guys who would be normally nervous if they're traveling to a different city and it's their first playoff game, that's not there. They're not even traveling. They're all in Orlando. So it's like no traveling. I can see the pros and cons of it, but it's like, it's going to be interesting. I'm probably watch a little bit of it today just to see, because we had some big upsets. You had LA lose last night to Portland, which I think is going to be a tough situation anyway. That would have been tough because Portland is just not a regular 8 seed. And then you have the Bucks lost yesterday to Orlando, which shouldn't have never happened. But it's going to be interesting to see some of these dynamics play out, because just the variables are not there at all. So,
in home court advantage, you have your own like colors and logos painted on the floor. What's painted on the floor in
they have now? Listen, they have that. Which team is home, so they still. but I guess when it's an away game, they're gonna switch courts, and then the home team will put on the white jerseys again. But it won't be a home game. Like, and that's what's interesting about the whole thing. Like there's no, you have momentum, and certain players feed off the crowd. Even certain elite players feed off the crowd. Yes. So now you're going to have it where there's no crowd there, right, and all you can feed off of is your other teammates. So it's going to be real interesting to see how these things play out. So I'm looking forward to watching a little bit of it. Just the bubble. At first, I didn't want to watch it at all because all the political stuff. But then when I watched it last night, I said, this is going to be interesting to see how some of these players react to like a very new circumstance that they're not used to at all. Yeah.
There's a game tonight, you said?
It's a few games. It's probably a few games on right now. Yeah, there'll be a game on tonight.
One just to kind of experience.
I think the one that you should watch should be Dallas and Clippers. Okay. Because the Clippers are picked to win the championship other than the Lakers. They have a very good team. So this second game though, Dallas has a guy named Luka Doncic that's very good, young guy from I can't remember where he's from, but he's from Europe. But he's very good, and he's been a pro since he was 13. He's very young, but he's very, very good. So if they steal one, then it's just a different series, just different. Mm-hmm. Like just watching these guys play with no crowd and nobody to feed off of, like it's different.
Does the like the fake crowd noise, is it kind of comical or?
To me it is.
Yeah.
To me it is, because it's like somebody hit a three and then you hear three and then the crowd screaming, but it's like nobody there. It's hilarious to me. Like y'all really got fake crowd here. That's crazy.
Would it have been better to just let them play in silence so you can kind of just hear?
I don't know. I don't know. That's interesting, because the one thing for me, it does make it seem more like I'm watching it like how I'm used to watching it. Mm-hmm. So I've watched the NBA D-League and they don't have all that stuff. It's a crowd there, but sometimes there's no crowd there at all.
Yeah.
But they're just playing. Like, so sometimes and that's even interesting to me too. So maybe I would have still thought it was interesting without all the fake crowd noise. I just think they're trying to appease the casual fan, the fan that really doesn't understand basketball. They just like watching it.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So does this? Maybe I'll find out tonight. Is there only one court that they play on, or are there multiple courts?
Yeah, that's why they
games.
Yeah, that's why they call it. That's why they call it the bubble.
And did they build that court for this purpose, or was? I
think it's. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's actually Orlando's practice court.
Okay.
I think that's what it is. I don't think it's an actual stadium.
Are there?
They called it the stadium. No, there's no stands.
Okay.
It's just what there is. It's just like it's the court, and then they got computer screens. You know what I'm saying? Like computer screens on where the fans would be, and they just got virtual people watching it.
I gotta watch this and see what it is.
It's interesting, man. It's interesting.
Because I was telling my son, one of my sons is the only one of my kids all my kids play sports and they're all athletic, but only one of them has any interest in watching sports, and even his interest is pretty small. Yeah, but I was telling him because the NFL was talking about doing the same thing. Like, actually, they were going to actually go like, well, one proposal, I don't know how serious it ever got, was they were going to go out to like the desert of Nevada and build like a little city with an NFL field in the middle of it, or, and that's where people would play the games. And I said to my son, it could be more fun to watch, because if they actually build it as a studio, like a TV studio, then you can put the cameras in different places in better perspectives than you can in Ford Field, for instance, or any NFL stadium.
Some of that is actually going on, but the NBA has always been good with providing, because they've always been in, these, the stadiums are typically smaller. Right. And then like the game is just a lot different than in football, but they have had some interesting like camera angles. Like you can see, like if I was standing on the baseline, some of the cameras, and they never had those camera angles before. So that aspect of it is entertaining, because it's like you're right there on the floor. You know what I mean? So it's kind of dope from a visual standpoint. Some of the confidence that I've seen in some of these players that wouldn't have had this confidence just because of the magnitude of the crowd and the pressure of the moment. Some of these guys are playing better. Some of the role players are playing better. So it's just interesting to watch. It's like a different kind of basketball. It's interesting.
Yeah. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I don't know how that football thing will work, though. I just don't know how it works.
It's not gonna, because they're gonna play in Ford Field anyway, even if it's empty. So it's gonna be more or less like normal, except without. I was looking at. Did they postpone the NFL for a few weeks? Did they do that? I believe they canceled the entire preseason. So I think the first game is going to be the first time.
Oh, wow.
Players play. I mean, maybe they. I can't remember exactly. Maybe they have one preseason game, but basically, they're practicing right now. They get tested every single day.
Because they would have started this Sunday.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
So, and last time I was telling my one son who is interested in sports, because last year we got somebody gave us tickets to the preseason games, two preseason home games. And so I said to him, last year we were going to games at this time of year, now, and they just barely started practicing, basically. So It's a very strange.
Yeah.
So I preached in a bubble for a while, and we all had to deal. We had to kind of deal with that ourselves. Every coach did something different. Some guys did it from home, and some guys probably still are. So somebody asked me does it bother you preaching to a camera? I said no, because I've recorded messages in the past when it was just me and the camera, literally where I set up the camera, and so it wasn't that different for me. But it's definitely not the same, and even now it's not the same where we have fewer people by design. And they're spaced out, and it's just not. You definitely experience, as the speaker, as a preacher, you definitely experience delivering the word differently based on who's there, how many people are there. So I can understand how for the players it's got to be different as well.
Yeah.
So
I know some of the guys are down there, they're struggling in that bubble, and then it's other guys that are kind of elevating their game. So it's interesting, man.
Yeah.
I always think that's interesting because we creatures of habit, and once you get used to playing from a certain dynamic, it's got to shake you up when that dynamic is no longer there. So I just want to see how some of these guys adapt to that. It's different.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Balance your sports out. Don't let it make you hate Christ and hate your family. No. But on a serious note, just, balance it out. We should all know the Holy Spirit should be convicting us when we are allowing things to take precedent over him. So keep your heart guarded. There's some definite pros and cons to sports. But it's and from my standpoint, it's not evil. So just guard your heart. It's some of the political things that's happening in sports is causing me to question, some of my allegiance to it. But sports in general is not a bad thing. There's a lot of life lessons that can be learned in playing and watching sports. So, is this the third show?
This is it. This is the third show.
Yeah. All right. I like that, man. All right. Do you want to send us off?
I'll send us off.
Yeah.
This is the end of episode 3 of the Rapper and Pastor Show. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're listening, and God bless you. We will see you, Lord willing, next week.
Yes, sir.